You know what this is reminding me actually of?
Ooh.
Like a real thing.
This better stick.
You guys ever hear of the Atlantic City Conference?
There it is.
Okay.
Oh, I missed you, Trilly.
But no,
Really?
I have not.
A lesser-known event in organized crime history started in Atlantic City, obviously, because that's where the conference was held. A man named Enoch Johnson.
Enoch.
That's a good name.
That's a mighty name, dude.
Yeah, you
Enoch.
gotta own that.
Yes, I am Enoch.
Went
Like
by
that.
the nickname Nucky.
Oh.
Okay, totally took it away. Totally, he did
Nucky's
it all for
a
the
badass.
Nucky.
If you're like, not Nucky, Nucky.
Nucky.
Like Knuckles?
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of.
Or
I don't know.
Enoch,
To me,
Nuck.
Nucky sounds more like
Nuck.
Nuck.
I go with Enoch,
like Nuck if you
man.
buck.
It sounds like a Superman villain.
It's very
you know?
biblical, right?
Grodd versus Enoch.
Okay.
I am the one who knucks.
Yes.
Nucky Johnson was a very prevalent figure in Atlantic City, Prohibition era Atlantic City culture. He controlled several businesses and held several political offices. Previous to his rise to power, briefly, we'll talk about a man named Louis Kuehnel. And this guy was, I believe, German, of German descent. Kuehnle. However, he has a way easier nickname to pronounce. He was known as the Commodore.
Nice.
Kim Phillips is pissed.
Yep.
The late 1800s, early 1900s, he rose to power in Atlantic City. He oversaw several city work projects. So he started water lines and inner-city transportation and...
That's a lot of clout.
Yeah, this guy was basically
Mover and a shaker.
helped build early Atlantic City into what it became and what it is now.
For
So
sure.
he owned a saloon hotel which specialized in gambling and prostitution, etc. And he basically had his little racket going. There were kickbacks, and he had to kind of go through him to get the ability to sell these vices in his city. And the hotel was a place where a lot of political movers and shakers would show up. They had like a club there, and one of the members died, and he kind of took the spot. He was like a local kind of popular man about town, and eventually got himself elected to several different political offices in Atlantic City. Contrary to the like New York organized crime, Chicago organized crime syndicates, or I guess the stories around them, Atlantic City was way more in the political realm, in that these guys didn't have to get their hands dirty. They had it set up to where several different layers were beneath them, where they were just getting the kickbacks and the dividends of these other
I didn't know that.
organizations.
So by the time they got to Atlantic City, they knew what they're doing.
Exactly.
Like they'd learned their lessons in Chicago and Las Vegas. Now, like, hey, wait, we got this.
We can just do it
Use the-
through legal channels,
use
essentially.
the casinos, everything. That's your laundering right there. Why get so
Exactly.
dirty when you have the mechanisms before you?
This sounds like it predates Las Vegas, though, by a little
Correct. Actually, that comes up.
I guess well. I sit corrected.
He had a vision for Atlantic City as this sort of seaside resort. He wanted to create this kind of paradise of vice,
It is really
basically, where
pretty.
he could have people come and gamble and go to the beach and pick up a hooker, go get drunk. Not necessarily that
All the
order.
family things.
Wait a
Yeah.
minute.
But the women's bathing suits can't be too short.
So during that time, another future president, Woodrow Wilson, was running for governor of New Jersey in opposition to the candidate that the Commodore, was backing. The Commodore decided that he was going to travel to the black African American sections of town and rally people with sums of $2 a vote to bring them around to different polling places and have them vote under various names, and basically committed rampant election fraud in his city.
Damn.
Woodrow Wilson won, and then he found out about this and made it his personal like vendetta against the city of Atlantic City, against the Commodore and his political machine in that city. He was building a water main to some like island off the coast, and he was also in control of the city water department, and they found it a conflict of interest, and he was basically defamed and
Wow,
was
they did
forced
that to
resign.
politicians back then?
Yeah, no shit.
And it actually stuck, and like the people actually like
People
left politics.
cared and listened, and wow.
So he was convicted in
Made
19
judgments.
Weird world.
They didn't have fake news back then. Interesting.
He was convicted in 1913 of a conflict of interest and corruption, was sentenced to 1 year hard labor and a $1,000 fine. After 6 months, he was released. He went to Bermuda for vacation and then went to go visit his family in Germany and then got bored. Decided he was going to come back because Bavaria, Germany. What do you want to, right? Like,
right. They've got cigarettes and coffee.
Beer or
And
whatever. And like
beautiful mountains and things.
Yeah. all
You
those
can't get high from mountains,
sweet
Angela.
mountains. So
I guess you've never had a Rocky Mountain High.
No, I haven't actually. I'm sorry, I haven't.
So he came back to Atlantic City, and during that time, he found that the second in command, his second in command, Enoch Johnson, Nucky, had basically taken over reins, and there was a brief, let's call it a civil power dispute, which he then conceded and decided, you know what,
That was civil.
Yeah, they were like, he's like, it's not gonna work.
Just I go for it.
Whatever, I'm getting old. Nucky is a better nickname than the Commodore.
Yeah.
You got the whole thing going. The kids like you got the Red Carnation or whatever. So he basically decided to fall back, find his lane, and remain in it. Famously said, actually, it's really sad. They'll build a monument to me someday. I built this town.
The Commodore?
This is the Commodore talking about Atlantic City, and no monument exists right now. However, there's one street in the city called Cunel Avenue
after his name. Nice.
Yeah. So the man who ended up receiving the reins, I guess, of this Atlantic City political machine was Enoch Johnson, Nucky. Enoch Johnson ended up basically following in his father's footsteps. So he became sheriff of these certain areas. In 1908, he was elected sheriff of Atlantic County and remained there until he was removed by court order in 1911. We'll get to that.
Ooh,
Nice
tease.
Mm-hmm.
So in actually about a year-ish after that, his wife died. And this is when they said, basically before that, both of them are teetotalers. They were witches.
Someone who doesn't drink a lot.
Someone doesn't drink.
At all, actually.
They've teetotaled.
They completely abstain.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they weren't really drinkers. After his wife died, he actually fell really heavy into the booze and started dating a bunch of showgirls.
Because that's
in the
what you
area.
do. You just go right to meth and you just
fuck
stick it.
Which is kind of, to me,
I'm catching up.
it seemed kind of sad, right?
time
I
has
don't know.
come.
It's very sad.
It was like, I don't know if he was just like, fucking finally, or if he was like, oh man, I can't do it anymore. Like,
Yeah.
fuck it, I'm just going to get drunk. He basically became this man about town in Atlantic City. He was in control of, he held several different political offices. It was like, comptroller, city
What
council.
is a comptroller?
They comptroll.
They troll comps.
They control.
We've talked about this before, and no one has bothered to look it up or delegate
it
the
out.
time to
I
do it.
think it's nothing. I think
Yeah.
that people just figure out, like, I'm going to go run for comptroller, and you get elected, and they're like, okay, you're comptroller, and
There you
then
go.
here's your money, and
Yep.
you don't
Sit
do
at
anything.
a desk and there's
Yeah.
like nothing comes
I'm
in.
gonna start googling comptroller jobs.
You shouldn't. Again, you'll waste your time on
Every
Earth.
company has one.
Yeah.
But they don't talk about it.
Yeah.
He inherited kind of the position from the Commodore, who had been ousted for pissing off Woodrow Wilson, which you don't do.
You don't piss off the woodman.
Right. He was able to acquire all of this kind of clout in Atlantic City prior to the Prohibition, and at the time they were still in charge of. They had access to the kickbacks from several different prostitution rings, gambling halls, saloons, etc. And then Prohibition hit, so everywhere else you can't get liquor. Atlantic City said, "Go fuck yourself."
Yeah.
So there was basically, it was called a dead letter law. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that.
No, can you explain it?
It's basically the law exists and no one in the region chooses to enforce it.
Oh, damn.
okay.
I didn't know that.
All right.
So the people of Atlantic City decided to say, go fuck yourself. So
Wow.
they continued to sell booze, and this is how it kind of rose to prominence during the 20s. It became known that you could go to Atlantic City and just get booze, and people
And
were
stay.
going. Yeah, so during the time they they wanted to refer to it as the world's playground. They were getting like international travel for some reason. It became this hot spot for tourism. During the time, he had a Ritz hotel built in the city and had several floors of it dedicated to kind of like his entourage and his lifestyle. It became very like almost like a Vegas-y mob boss kind of thing. He was like buying everyone drinks and walking around handing out $100 bills and giving out hams and coal and shit or whatever.
Hey, how you doing there, Johnny? Have a ham.
Definitely selling alcohol.
Thanks, boss.
Yeah.
Where can I put the ham?
Was it just in his pockets?
Yeah, it's just
He had a ham guy.
yeah, ham guy carry around, you
He
know.
had like a sack of hams. He was like, Bobby, get over here. Give this guy a ham. I like the cut of his jib.
He
Ham
turns
guy.
around after putting his hand in his pocket. He turns around and goes, "What did I tell you about not having ham in my pocket?" He goes, "I'm so sorry about just stuffing ham in his front pocket."
It's actually
There you go,
Sliced ham.
No, it's a hole in his pocket. He reaches through, and then the guy behind him hands
yeah,
it a ham.
that's right.
And he pulls it out.
It's
So
a
everybody's
ham off.
Like, oh my yes! Points! All the points!
That is a fucking-
all the
yeah.
points!
That's
Ham
a
off.
ba-ba-ba-ba. Nicely done.
He was famously quoted as saying, "When I lived well, everyone lived well." So he was very open-handed with his money. He would go around and give people coal during like the winters and stuff. Eventually, he decided that it was more seasonal than he wanted. People would show up when it was nice, but then the weather kind of gets shitty in New Jersey because it's fucking New Jersey. He built a convention center. He thought this is going to be the way of the future, so he built the Atlantic City Convention Center, a 650-foot by 350-foot hall, pretty much right on the beach. In May of 1929, he held what was called the Atlantic City Conference, in which several prominent underworld mafia figures came to basically discuss the terms of a kind of interconnected illegal alcohol distribution that they wanted to kind of like put together under the guise of Meyer Lansky's wedding, the guy who was, I think, underboss to Al Capone. Basically, it was a room full of gangsters that they had at the convention center.
Like we're in right now.
Similar.
Oh.
Probably less cartoon characters.
Maybe.
He got together with several of the other mobsters in the adjoining cities: Charles Luciano, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Al Capone, etc. They formed the Big Seven, or the Seven Group,
They always have to have cool names, and they gotta give
which is
everything
pretty
a hook
cool.
name. Yeah.
The Big Seven.
Big
That's
Seven.
pretty cool. So they decided that they were going to basically formulate this big like network of alcohol distribution up and down the East Coast and into Chicago, I guess, which would be central. There isn't really much coming out of that. They don't say whether or not like it came to fruition or not. But eventually, Enoch, Nucky's, I like the way they split this, his own vices did him in.
Oh, boy.
Oh, no.
Got
was
high on
hitting
his
it.
supply.
He was dating. No, well, yes, I guess he was getting drunk frequently at the Ritz and was kind of like. I actually read an interview from some lady who said that she owned like a inn in town he would frequent, come to have dinner, and she sat next to him one night. And she said he was, despite his appearance, was a very gruff, very kind of coarse man. But had the appearance of like kind of a very buttoned up, had the red carnation suits and everything. But apparently this dude was like kind of a little bit of a tough guy. There was no criminal violence. He never had anyone killed. He never got in any fights. This is purely somebody who was kind of born into a political kind of position of power, and then used it to their advantage to make a lot of money. So he ended up dating a showgirl named Showgirl 1. Maybe not. It's just called Showgirl. Okay, so he ends up. I know.
No.
Dancing girl. Dancing lass.
No, they didn't even give her a name in
He's
this? This is history?
It's internet history. I mean, it's as good as we're going to get for now. He's dating a showgirl, and which actually leads him to...
A lifetime of arts and culture.
Yeah.
She was actually also dating another man named William Randolph Hearst, who happened to be a reporter for the Atlantic City Journal. And in a fit of jealousy, Hearst decided he was going to publish a series of articles that...
Damn.
Right? Like, dude, let it go.
He was hurt.
Let it go. You're going to write a bunch of articles? Go
He
show
was
knock on his door,
He was
dog. Like,
hysterical.
he was being hysterical.
He was being hysterical.
He was being
Yeah.
very hysterical. That basically outlined the corruption and the fact that even though it was Prohibition era, they were still getting booze in these places, and it was directly running through Nucky Johnson, head of the Republican Party of like Atlantic City, and owner of all these different political titles in town. And so eventually, Franklin D. Roosevelt got wind of this, and they ended up prosecuting him. In 1939, he was convicted for unpaid taxes.
Always. They always get
yep.
them on the taxes. Always.
Easy
They
way
always
in.
get them on the taxes.
He owed $125,000 in unpaid taxes.
Jesus Christ.
Which at the time I saw
Lot.
that he was making about roughly $500,000 a year, which was like I think they equated to about $5 million a year.
Wow.
In modern money, so quite a bit. 2-week trial, he was convicted, and they sentenced him to 10 years in prison and a $20,000 fine, which you
Taking
100
a
grand.
little bit of a bump, though, because all that money you got to pay back. You're like, damn.
Yeah, but you're back in it 3 months down the line.
Maybe.
So-
I don't know.
So he, probably about a week before he went to jail, he made things official with his Swedish-American girlfriend. And it doesn't say whether or not this is the showgirl or not, but her name was Florence, quotes, Flossie Osbeck.
Oh, Flossie's a
Oh,
good
Flossie.
nickname.
Flossie for
Flossie girl.
Florence? That's such a good one, man.
Yeah.
Flossie.
I love that.
Flossie.
They got married like a week before he went to prison. He served 4 years. And they told him he had to pay the $20,000 fine, and he avoided that by taking the Pauper's Oath. Have you guys ever heard of that?
No.
No.
Popper's oath.
Pauper's Oath, P-A-U-P, not like a
Oh.
jalapeno popper. So basically stating that he had no money and that he couldn't pay it, which was bullshit. And he moved in with his wife and got a job at an oil company as a salesman. His wife got a job at a winery, and he lived to a ripe old age and didn't get shot. Head of a significant, what we consider, I guess, if they're not participating in prohibition, crime syndicate in Atlantic City, and fucking did 4 years and got away with it and died an old man with his wife who worked at a winery. Like, I feel like that's a success.
Way to go, Enoch.
Yeah, pretty much.
Way to go, Nucky.
Well done.
That's a win.
Smart.
As much as we know, he didn't kill anybody. As far as we know, no killing. Because there's no killings have ever happened in Atlantic City.
No, pretty clean.
That was the whole thing. They said that he ruled via, and this is a quote from, I think it was like the New York Times did an article on it, but it was via a velvet hammer. So it was that kind of like
Nice.
the implied threat, right?
Yeah.
Like
He's a foppish dandy. God, come on. No one died. Come on.